What even is the game collection? I've been reviewing RPGs for quite a while. I've welcomed you back to the game collection over 100 times, and yet I've never actually explained what the game collection even is, how it started, or how it's different from other content creators, and even how it's different from some of my own reviews and my other series experience points. So let's talk about that. The game collection started in summer of 2013, and it initially began as like a showcase of interesting games from a collector's perspective, specifically, hence the title, The Game Collection. But before long, it turned out that I was only ever talking about RPGs because that was all I was ever really interested in. Well, gradually, the show kind of solidified into what it is today, an RPG review series where I provide some context surrounding the game's release, a brief hook of the game's story, and I play the game through to completion, to the end of the game rather, and then I talk about what makes the game unique, pitfalls that might deter interested players, and sometimes a little bit about the legacy that the game has gone on to leave behind. One of the defining characteristics of the game collection reviews is that I play each game in question until the end, before even starting to write the review. And this has actually always been a point of pride for me because it serves many purposes. RPGs in particular are an incredibly story-dependent kind of video game genre. In order to weigh each title, the player has to invest the time to actually get properly invested in the story and in the characters. Some RPGs are still introducing combat mechanics hours after the ink on IGN's presses have dried. RPGs in particular just aren't well suited to the review cycle of larger publications, and as a result, they suffer. However, I think it's in these really time-consuming RPGs that it really requires the dedication and time investment from the player that accurate reviews are the most crucial. I wouldn't trust a book reviewer who only reviews a book after reading a couple of chapters. I wouldn't trust a movie reviewer who only watched the movie for a dozen minutes or so. And I wouldn't trust an RPG review that only played a few hours. I have made a compromise though in the form of experience points in which I don't review games as much as give my first impressions of games that I haven't played to completion yet, though I still want to get my opinions out there, my first reactions, and basically that's kind of my equivalent of what a lot of larger publications do, except I always fully disclose that, how much of the game I've actually played. You can usually tell within the first few hours of a game if it's going to be awful, but you can't always tell how good it's going to be. So I feel like these kinds of reviews often have a place, just they're not finished yet. And as a result, sometimes you'll see that I go on to do full episodes of the game collection, but usually episodes of experience points will be after about 6 to maybe a dozen hours, and are typically reserved for covering the very newly released games, though there are also some exceptions to that. The game collection isn't a review series in the typical sense either, because I'm not really trying to quantify the game's content with the goal of grading it or anything. I will often say whether or not I personally enjoyed certain aspects of the game. I'll also provide reasons for why something did or did not resonate with me personally. Not as a way of passing judgment, but rather to provide information to the viewer to allow you to decide for yourself if the game might be for you or not. For this reason, you've never seen a final score for a video game featured in the game collection, which is something that I realize confuses and frustrates and annoys some people, but in my experience, scores can just be deceptive. Attempting to quantify a purely subjective experience is like trying to catch jello in a butterfly net. It's just not the right tool for the job. Personally speaking, my favorite RPG of all time is in a constant state of flux and changes depending on the time of day and my current mood. If I can't even decide which game is my favorite, do I have really any business distributing decimal points to games to determine how they rate compared to every other game in existence? I don't really think so. Because of the open-ended nature in which I talk about RPGs, viewers will sometimes come away with vastly different takeaways, and I suppose that in a way it's kind of like what I'm aiming for. I'm not here to declare what games you must play. Because RPGs aren't one size fits all. I want to provide players with enough information for themselves to decide whether or not a game is for them. And slapping a number on a review at the end, I find has this tendency to sort of overshadow any of the actual content discussed over the course of the review. Numbers don't have nuance. I don't believe that there's such a thing as an objective review. Human beings are computers made of meat who are bad at math. Reality is objective, but we experience everything through our own lenses of personal experiences, which are inherently subjective. So I believe that the best we can ever try to do is to speak objectively about our very subjective experiences. Because I realize that I'm not an objective being, I'm typically very conscious about describing games in absolute terms. I try to qualify all of my statements. I'll never tell you that Terranigma is the best action RPG of all time, in an episode of the Game Collection at least, even if I might personally feel that way. Instead, I might say something along the lines of, Terranigma is my favorite action RPG on the Super Nintendo, and if you love fluid action combat and that classic top-down style that the SNES is known for, this is definitely a game that you'll want to check out. Now, all of that isn't to say that what I'm doing is the best way to review RPGs, it's just the best way for me to review RPGs. There are plenty of RPG reviewers out there who are doing things differently, and I have the deepest and utmost respect for them all. Anyone who has a soft spot for RPGs is honestly alright in my book. I'm just saying all of this to kind of help give you an idea about what I try to do to make episodes of the Game Collection special to me, and why they take so long to put together, and to maybe explain why I don't give scores, and sometimes even to my own detriment. My goal with SuperDerek RPGs is to change the way we talk about RPGs. The Game Collection was inspired by review magazines from the early 2000s that would criticize RPGs for containing turn-based combat. They would refer to RPGs as Final Fantasy clones, despite bearing little resemblance to the Final Fantasy series. My approach has been inspired by doing the exact opposite of what they were doing. I want to bring nuance back into the way we talk about RPGs. I want to lower the barriers for newcomers to the genre. I want to get people thinking. I want to get people talking and get people excited for RPGs. I want to encourage people to get out of a rut and take on their backlog and to play more RPGs. If you're new here, and if you like the sound of my goals, consider subscribing to get notified of when I put out videos aimed at doing just that. I'm SuperDerek, and I make thoughtful and thought-provoking videos for gamers who love RPGs, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a great day, everyone.